Hello and welcome to Light Warrior Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Kan, and I am the author of the book, Sensitivities to Superpower, How to Harness Your Gifts, Fulfill Your Purpose, and Create a Life of Joy. Would love to gift you my Sensitive Soul Empowerment Guide. So if you're a highly sensitive soul and you are overwhelmed with everything that you're feeling, maybe you're an empath, it's a great guide to get. You can get it at sensitivesoulguide.com. And then after you get that, we'll actually invite you for free to our Light Medicine community where we do free monthly mini healings and all sorts of other activities, and where you can get support, especially if you're highly sensitive like I am. And many of our people love to have that safe place where they can interact and not feel like a weirdo. Well, today I'm super excited because I have with me my amazing mentor, coach, and friend and colleague, Marcus Bird. And we've been together, oh my goodness, over a decade, I think. I don't know. I keep adding years.
Yeah, it's been
Yeah,
it's
and
been 1 or 2 years.
yeah. Well, we started out with Wellness Leadership Academy, right? You used to be a corporate Jedi, then you kind of went
Yeah,
through this illness yourself, like I did, chronic fatigue syndrome. I had
totally.
fibromyalgia, and then we both healed ourselves. Like, we didn't know each other then, and we got together, and you were
Yeah,
teaching me, business stuff, like how to get my word out there. And thanks to Marcus, actually, and Andy, his former partner, the Topican healing method was birthed
it was.
with your encouragement. So thank you so much. So many people have, have benefited from that. And
Absolutely.
now you have your own, well, I mean, you had it before, your healing
Totally.
method, right? The Activator
Totally.
Healer Coach Program.
Yeah.
And we'll share with people, where to get a, hold of information about that near the end of the show. But
Good.
Marcus, we're doing this deep dive, dimensional deep dive,
Love
and
it.
I love this.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Love talking about these concepts and diving into the, dimensional, multi-dimensional sort of existence that we're sort of playing out right now. And yeah, I think it's becoming more and more important to understand this as, dimensions compress and as timelines compress and, things become a little stranger and weirder. And I think some of these things help to explain that, which is helpful, I think.
Oh, it's so helpful. There were times where, as I was developing my healing modality, I was getting answers from source, the 0 point, and I didn't understand any of it. I was like looking at, I actually had to write them all down because I'm like, what is dimensional fascia? I have no idea, but I'm a medical doctor, so I'm sure the universe is telling me in a way that I can understand, right? Which
Yes.
which now you've defined for me is strings and membranes. I'm like, oh, of course, it looks like
Yeah.
fascia.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
it's so cool. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about timelines, time. So kind of give us a background of, you talked about compression earlier, so maybe we can unpack some of these terms.
Well, I think the interesting part about it is we live in a dimensional universe, and a lot of, quantum and science has talked about, space and time being intertwined together, and there is only is space and time, and you can't separate those. But that's not entirely true. You can absolutely separate space and time. And it's more about the dimensional reality of what we exist in and how there are multi-dimensional sort of membranes, if you like, multi-dimensional sort of timelines, multi-dimensional, or dimensional realities. And I think part of the thing we're sort of starting to learn and understand right now is the existence of these sort of dimensional aspects of reality. And we're finding that, the dimensions are compressing together as we move from one dimension of reality to the next dimension of reality. And it's just part of the evolution of the universe itself, the expansion of the universe itself. The universe wants to expand. It is expanding. And, even science understands at some level that the universe is expanding. They don't understand why or all the mechanics necessarily around it, but it is expanding. And one of the core aspects of that is it's expanding dimensionally. Therefore, it's drawing us to expand as well. So we're also in expansion. But as the universe shifts dimensional realities and we find that there's a breathing in, breathing out aspect. So as we get closer to jumping, either what you might refer to as a timeline, which is a smaller version as a dimensional jump, but as we get closer to that, everything starts to compress, which means timelines are compressing, realities are compressing, and then once there's a shift, they start to expand out again. And then over the next however many thousands, millions of years, it'll compress again and expand again and compress again and expand again. And that's just the nature of the universal reality.
Oh, wow. Well, one of the things that when you talk about compression, years ago when I was, trying to get an answer for a client, there was a new term that came up in my mind, of course, using the verbiage that I use,
Yeah.
was called timeline convergence.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
sounds very similar to what you're talking about. Like there was a
Totally.
sense that there was something converging. And then even our Thor and other movies, talk about the nine realms coming together and we can jump from one, universe to another. Like, is that so you're saying part of that's real?
Part of that's real. Absolutely. That's exactly what's playing out right now. And we sort of know this or experience this when we go to sleep. When we're in the sleeping space, we tend to move into the dimensional realms or sort of reunite again with the dimensional realms, and we tend to travel through those dimensional realms, which is why we can sometimes have earthly dreams of meeting friends or other people that we know and familiar faces and familiar scenarios and situations. But then the next night we can have these totally bizarre dreams where we might be on another planet or in a totally different reality altogether. This is an example of us moving through dimensional sort of realities. So we know that they exist because we experience them when we go into the sleeping space. Um,
Mm.
and then we come back into this reality and anchor ourselves and entangle ourselves back into this sort of timeline reality. But at night we go journeying.
Wow, wow. Well, why is it that we anchor ourselves back in this timeline? There are plenty of people who said, "Hey, my body doesn't feel good. I have a chronic illness. Like, why would I choose to come back day after day into this timeline?"
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question, and will we really fully understand it until we journey back to wherever source or wherever we came from? I'm not 100% sure. One of the things that I know is factual is we're here to expand, and as part of our expansion, we help the universe to expand. We are theoretically part of the universe. We are one with the universe definitely at a higher frequency level. We are fully integrated with the universe. And my sense, or what I've been informed or told, is that we're here to expand. And so part of expansion is contraction. So when we come into this timeline, we contract ourselves. And then when we leave, we fully expand ourselves. But the journey from contraction to the full expansion, which is when we maybe cross over or move on, whatever you want to call it, is part of that remembering. So we come in, we might find ourselves with something that is very contractive, like illness, disease, pain, suffering, whatever that might be. And our role is to learn how to expand through and past that. And that in turn then helps the whole universe to expand. Now, in essence, what this really is about is a consciousness expansion journey. And we will have a sort of a breathing out, a shrinking, a restriction, and then a breathing in to expand. And that journey is the expansion of consciousness journey. So we'll get trapped in a body that gives us pain and suffering and anguish and illness and all that sort of stuff in an effort to have us expand past all of that, through and past that. And that experience helps the universe to expand or continue its expansion. Now, as we journey through different octaves of reality, different sort of dimensional timelines, we start to move further and further away from those realities. So theoretically, as we continue to expand and grow in consciousness, then you will find that we don't need to have such dense experiences any longer.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, some of the teachers I've been seeing on, YouTube and the like are talking about how we're actually going through multiple different timelines in a second, but we're choosing similar timelines to anchor into, or maybe the entangle word you're using. So,
Yeah.
what's that about? And are we allowed to choose a timeline where we are not sick, where we,
Yeah.
don't have an illness or maybe never had cancer or something?
Yeah. So I think, I think the long and the short answer to it is yes, we can choose theoretically whatever timeline we want to. However, we do entangle ourselves into this timeline, and if we weren't entangled, and I tend to like the word entangled, just because of the strings and pathways and all the things we talk about from an Egyptian sort of healing point of view, if we didn't do that, then we would probably not stay in this sort of octave of reality. We'd probably shift and move into another octave, which means we wouldn't exist here any longer. We would return to wherever. There is a journey here that we're on, that we, almost like a mission that we sort of set ourselves on, and we're here to, finish that mission before we decide that, another reality is what we want to experience. So we tend to entangle ourselves into this reality so we don't jump too far. Now, that doesn't mean we can't jump timelines. And the way I like to look at it, maybe as like an analogy, and it's not necessarily, this isn't necessarily true, but it could be a good analogy, is that, maybe in one timeline so if we imagine the chromatic scale, a music scale, and how we have 12 notes to an octave, and maybe each octave is a different dimension of reality. And as we rise octaves, we move into higher conscious states, we move into different realities. And maybe one of the timelines we exist in is the E note. But there are 12 notes that we could exist in, 12 timeline realities potentially in this example that we exist in. And we tend to entangle ourselves to the octave we're in, but we get a choice to move through that octave through each note. So we have potentially X amount of timelines that we can exist in. So if we're stuck in a timeline, if we're stuck in C, for example, and C is, illness and disease and pain and suffering, yet E note, a few notes away, is peace and harmony. We can choose to exist in that timeline. This is why some people have miracle healings, instant healings. This is why that's possible. But if you stay in the note that you're sort of resonating at, then you continue to either repeat the pattern or exist in that pattern. But if we were to jump these timelines of notes, then we can exist in another reality. Because the fun part about this, as you would know, being a previous doctor, the story how, every cell in every 7 years, we are totally new. There's not one cell in our body.
They never told us that in medical school.
Probably not. Okay. Probably not, but that's the reality that they tell us, right? I don't know how true it is, but I believe, from all the research that we have cells that regenerate and are new every hour, every day, every week, every month, and every
right. So why do I still have this body, this
Correct.
height, right?
That's exactly right. And that's because we're entangled into this octave, but also the notes. So if we want to choose a different reality, we choose a different note. Now, that's going to take a couple of things, right? It's going to take a different level of consciousness to get to that note, because each note is a slightly different level or expanded version of consciousness. And it's going to take a different consciousness to achieve the things that we're wanting to achieve. See, time and consciousness are fairly entangled in themselves, and timelines we're hooked into timelines to some degree based on consciousness. And if we want to shift a timeline, we've got to shift a consciousness. And so consciousness, timelines, this ability to expand or contract, so to be in pain and suffering or health and wellness or whatever, or joy or happiness, is very much a consciousness entangled experience. And part of the anchoring is an octave of conscious awareness that we anchor or entangle ourselves with. So if we're wanting to move or shift or change, consciousness is one of the primary things that we have to shift and change.
Right. Well, in the consciousness shift, it seems to me that the people that are, making these shifts and expanding in this way are less attached to the idea that they have to be perfectly healthy physically. like in other words, they're like at peace more with whatever is happening, which is seemingly counterproductive because you're like, oh, we're gonna imagine your ideal reality and you're able to do this and that and you're this weight and you have this life and you're your kids are happy and your husband's healthy and all this kind of stuff. And then we get to a higher consciousness, and it just seems like the people that higher consciousness were like, I'm okay with how it is, like
Yeah.
it's kind of weird. It's like a dichotomy of, you know,
I think that the interesting thing is we've got to redefine what consciousness is, because we have this sort of connection to thinking and consciousness, to awareness and
okay,
consciousness is beyond that.
okay,
So they are two different things. So we can think ourselves well, we can imagine ourselves well, we can use that faculty that sits in here to some degree to imagine ourselves, but consciousness isn't that necessarily.
mm,
There's a part of consciousness there because the way we sort of think of consciousness or measure consciousness or how science does is around awareness and the ability to be aware, and the more aware you are, the more conscious you are. And they will then make statements like, well, animals aren't really conscious because they're not aware, and it doesn't look like they can do the things that we do, so they're very low consciousness, whereas this is totally incorrect. And from a universal point of view, everything that vibrates in the universe, everything that has any amount of motion, vibration, frequency, has consciousness. And this is the thing we have to redefine, is that primarily the universe is a consciousness engine. It's a
mm,
consciousness machine. It's a consciousness sort of technology, if you sort of will. And so everything in the universe has consciousness, from the humans to animals to trees, plants, solid matter itself, rocks and soil, and all of these things have a consciousness to them. Now, science is starting to expand the version of consciousness and starting to say that, wow, yeah, animals look more conscious than we first thought. Plant life looks more conscious than we first thought. It communicates with each other. They have this whole network of conversation that goes on. So we're starting to expand that reality. But if we're going to do a quantum leap in health and wellness and timelines, then we have to have a quantum leap in consciousness and how we think consciousness is. So one of the ways to maybe think about it, and again, it's not quite like this, but this could be a transition point, is to imagine consciousness is a whole body experience, not a thinking experience. Awareness is a thinking experience, right? I can stand here and go, I'm aware of Karen, on Zoom, on the other end of the world, other side of the world. I'm aware of being in this space here. I'm aware that I'm a man, a human man. I'm aware, right? I can be aware of these things. It doesn't necessarily make me conscious,
mm.
right? And,
Because they
and
talk
so,
about conscious awareness, like as if
correct,
that's one word.
correct. And it's not. And
Mm,
that's the interesting part about this. So if we are to jump timelines, if we are to step into another reality, if we are to move and expand with the universe, then we have to start to separate some of these things and not make them the same thing, right? Thinking, consciousness separate, awareness, consciousness separate. There is an amount of consciousness within awareness and within thinking. Of course, there is a conscious awareness and a conscious thinking, but consciousness is so far beyond that. It's sort of crazy and ridiculous.
are we
With
naturally expanding our consciousness, or is there work involved?
Well, I think, we are on an expansion, sort of whether we like it or not, because the universe is expanding. So as it expands, it draws us into that expansion. Even from a sort of planetary point of view, a solar system point of view, our solar system is expanding. All of the planets are moving away from the sun.
Mm,
It's minuscule, right, per year, but it's moving away from the sun. So everything we know is being drawn out, and like a vacuum, if something's moving away from the vacuum, it's going to draw the vacuum even more. It's going to suck more of the air out. It's going to expand it more, and that's what's happening. So we can't not expand. However, we have a choice as to the speed at which that goes and how we journey through that. And it's a little bit like we can journey through that with calm and peace and stability, or we can journey through that kicking and screaming and being unstable. That's our choice. The sort of answer to your question is we don't have to do anything to expand because it's a natural part of it. But if we don't, then we're likely to have more kicking and screaming and pain and anguish than if we actually voluntarily move forward and work on the expansive part of ourselves.
Okay, and if someone says, well, I would like to expand my consciousness consciously, how would
Yeah.
one do that?
Yeah, I think one of the first parts, and it sort of comes back to your sort of words just before. Part of it is sitting in the middle, and what I mean by that is that we get very anchored and entangled into timelines based on belief systems. So when we're anchored into a belief system, that helps to anchor us into a timeline. Right? Now that could be beneficial, or maybe it's not beneficial. If you're trying to expand, it's probably not as beneficial. If you're trying to expand, then you don't want to get caught in a timeline around a belief system or belief, because beliefs and timelines are very intertwined together, and beliefs are one of the things that helps us to anchor into a timeline. So if we're wanting to move out of that and be in an expansive state, then we have to allow ourselves to sit in the middle of things, right? So for example, and one I often use is this concept of round earth, flat earth.
Oh, yeah,
And
that's a good one.
yeah, it's a great one, right? And various people have different beliefs on it. Some believe we're on a flat earth, some believe we're on a round earth. And if you're wanting to expand consciousness, then you need to sit in the middle of those two realities and say to yourself, well, there could be a flat earth and there could be a round earth. And I'm not necessarily going to hold on to one of those beliefs. I'm going to sit right in the middle of it and go, okay, it could be true. It might be flat, but it also could be true. And it's a little bit Schrodinger's cat type of experiment. And Schrodinger's cat experiment is a great one to help us to understand how we expand. And with Schrodinger's cat, the best thing you can do is sit in the middle. And the middle is the cat's alive or the cat's not alive. And until you open the box, you're not going to know. So we can sit in the middle of this sort of awareness, this reality state, and say, okay, it could be flat, it could be round. We're not going to know until we expand into the next dimension. Right?
Okay,
So we're
you
not
can't
going to
just
know,
ask your
really.
friend Amit to tell us the answer.
Well, of course, we could do that, absolutely. But
Probably won't answer.
we can get a lot of answers around these things, right? But again, and Amit's really careful with things like telling futures and stuff like that, because the minute, a higher dimensional being comes in and says, hey, here's your future, they've totally influenced that future because they've embedded a belief in what the future could be. And it may or may not be that. That may or may not be true because there's so many things that can happen between today and tomorrow that could influence how tomorrow turns out that may or may not be known. So she's very careful at influencing our awareness state, our thinking state, because she wants us to expand our conscious state and wants us to continue to expand consciously. So then we come back to this concept of consciousness, and it becomes a whole body experience that every part of us is a living, breathing example of consciousness, not just our thought brain or heart brain or gut brain or one cell. It's actually a whole body experience. And it's an intertwined, interconnected experience with the universe itself.
Wow.
The universe is just an example of consciousness in motion, in action.
Well, a lot of people are kind of into let's do, the ayahuascas or the DMTs or, the psilocybin. I actually said it right this time. To access higher realms. So I, for whatever reason, I haven't not really been attracted to that personally. Not making it wrong or bad or anything like that, but just like, is that a way of expanding consciousness?
It's definitely a way of tapping into expanded consciousness, so getting an experience of what it's like to be in a expanded conscious state. It's dangerous to some degree unless it's done really well, because of rapid expansion is a little bit like rapid decompression. It can collapse the mental, the mental abilities, and to send people into your compromised psychological states because it's such a rapid expansion. And because of the sort of dimension we're existing in and the conscious state we're existing in, rapid expansion is a little bit dangerous from a entanglement into a particular timeline. So what can happen is people then have psychological issues and they start to merge dimensions, they start to merge timelines, and then they don't know what's real any longer
Oh,
because
okay.
because they're entangled into this, dimension or this timeline where we see things the way they sort of operate. There's
Right.
solid matter and there's solid things, and we can't walk through walls and these sort of things. And then someone has this experience of a more expanded dimensional reality where you can walk through walls, and then they come back to this reality and they lose their mind because they keep banging into walls. Because they
Mm,
think they should be able to move through it. But because they've now returned to this dimensional reality, where walking through walls isn't possible right now, it's not impossible, right? So it is possible to do it, but in this dimension and consciousness level that we're entangled into, it's not really possible to do it right now.
okay,
It will
okay.
be possible to do it.
Yeah, like they kind
Not
of
right
show us
this
on
second.
some shows. Like that's why I really like those supernatural shows where
Yeah.
like Flash can kind of vibrate so fast that he
Totally.
is in phase with
Yeah.
the wall, right? And then
Correct.
he walks through the
Correct.
wall. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
We can just walk through the wall.
Okay, now I want to get back to what you said about being in the middle
Yeah.
because there are those that will and talk about how they don't wish to polarize. I'm really going on a tangent here. Don't
Yeah.
wish to polarize,
Yeah.
so they're not going to say anything about what's going on in the world, whether, there's certain things that people are supposedly mandated to get or do or that kind of thing. And they're like, well, in my reality, this isn't happening. Or, in my reality, I'm safe, which is true, but, like where is that line between the I'm neutral versus I don't like this, this is not okay, and I'm taking a stand. Like, you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and I think you're talking about passive versus active. So you can take a
Mm.
passive approach to it, and to some degree, the passive approach may look like a I'm not listening, I'm not seeing, I don't want la 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 la,
Well,
right?
they
And
might say I'm being neutral because they're not going to polarize to this preference or this preference.
yeah,
See?
yeah. So it just depends the acknowledgement level of the reality that they're sort of trying to polarize, right? Because there's a sitting in a center point and moving through a center point, or there's a passive where I'm just going to sit in the center point and I'm just not going to get involved.
Oh,
But
okay.
so the difference is
One's passive, okay, I get it. Yeah.
one's passive, one's active. From an expansion point of view, we want to be active, right? And the active part
Mm.
is, okay, here's possibly what's going on. There's this reality playing out, and then there's this reality playing out. And I'm going to actively move through the center of those two realities to change both of those realities to create something new. So I'm
Mm.
not going to sit on one side or the other. I'm going to actually move through the middle of them and create a new reality. And this is a great example for wellness as well, right? Because when you sit in polarities, if you're sitting in an illness, the polarity of the illness is wellness theoretically, and so then you start this battle of illness versus wellness, and you're desperately trying to go from one side of the pendulum to the other side of the pendulum, and that's sort of not how the universe plays out, because the universe plays the pendulum back and forth. It swings in back and forth. The universe breathes in and breathes out. There's this constant sort of rhythm and flow. So if you're caught in that pendulum swing rather than being right in the center and diving through the middle of it, then you're not actually fixing the problem. You're just going to the opposite end of the problem rather than being dead in the middle and moving through the center of the issue so that you can birth a brand new reality.
Oh,
Now, the
wow,
interesting
that's
thing about brand
interesting.
new realities is they're beyond your thinking. And
Mm.
here's an example, right? So, and there's a few of them. If we take business as an example, out of all of the people I've mentored and those that have been incredibly successful, I would say everyone who's been incredibly successful, and you can judge that by whatever you want, right? Because it's a bit, it depends on how you value incredible result. But those that have expanded and grown and built amazing businesses and blah blah blah, all of them have said to me, I never imagined being here. I never imagined getting to this level of success or having this thing happen or, having that created. And that's a classic example of going through the middle and birthing something sort of almost new that you never expected.
Instead of thinking, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be when I'm healthy, I'm going to look like this and it's going to
Right.
be this way and being attached to
Correct.
that.
Correct.
Oh,
So you get attached to the outcome, and of course, if that's not if that's not a more expanded version, right? Because the opposite of illness, let's call it wellness for lack of a better word, is not necessarily an expanded state.
oh, that's true. Yeah.
Is the new reality that maybe you weren't expecting, right? So, for example,
Mm,
you and I, right? We're a bit of a living, sort of breathing reality of this because when I had chronic fatigue syndrome, the opposite that I would have imagined, right? Because I was a corporate Jedi, and sickness got me sort of out of that. But the opposite of that would have been wellness back in the corporate world. That would have been because I never imagined I'd be here right now. I couldn't, and you might have been the same. You might have been, well, I was a doctor. The opposite of my sickness is to be a doctor again in wellness. Do you know what I mean? Like be back out being playing doctor. But that's not what happened. You created a whole new reality. Now you're a doctor of light medicine. It's like, hang on a minute, what happened there? Because that's not the opposite of I'm a sick doctor, I want to be a well doctor. It's actually a whole new reality.
right. Much to the chagrin of my parents,
Much,
or
much
at least the parents in that timeline.
correct.
It's like,
Without a doubt.
what? Now?
And the classic of
I thought you
this,
went to make money as an MD,
yeah,
and now you want to be an acupuncturist, and now you're not even being an acupuncturist. You're
that's
closing your
it.
practice. How are you going to make money, right?
Exactly, exactly. And so, that's a sort of an example of that through the middle, and
Mm.
birthing something bigger and more amazing and more incredible than would have happened if you hadn't have birthed that. And the Egyptians used to talk a lot of, well, quite a bit about this from their version of yin yang. So the Egyptians had a version of yin yang that included a third aspect, and they used to refer to it as mother, father, child. So they never had just black and white or yin yang. They always had mother, father, child. And the aim of the two realities that we're experiencing is to birth the next reality because that's
Okay.
way more expanded. Because if you're on a line between sickness and wellness, right? Let's call it right, black or white. Uh, they're just the opposite of the same line. So
Right, it's
black,
the same
white are the
line.
opposite. Exactly, same line. So how have you expanded consciously? How have you? You haven't. You're still on the same line, right?
I
And
love
and
that.
so what the universe or what the self, especially right now, is asking is it's asking you to expand. So if you're sitting on this line and you're in the black, right, and you want to go to the white, and you're struggling to go to the white, that's because the universe is asking you not to go to the white. It's asking you to create a new reality more expanded than the white or the black. So if
Mm.
you're not getting well, that's part of the issue. You're trying,
Ah,
you're playing the same line that got you the sickness, right? The same line. Because I could have got well from chronic, well, I did get well from chronic fatigue, obviously, but I could have got well and gone right back to where I started. And in fact, I had an opportunity. Um, so after I got, after I started to get well, a few old corporate people found out that I was well, and actually one very, very big international company sent me a contract for a huge sum of money. And the contract sat on my desk. And I remember I was talking to Stephanie, my wife, and it was like, what do I do? Do I sign this? And it was one of those, not sliding door moments, but one of those pivotal moments where I go, okay, I could sign this contract, be incredibly wealthy, and in 20 years, 30 years, retire very well. No problem, no issues. But but the expansion part of me went, you can't sign it. I can't tell you how many times I went to sign it and my body like physically wouldn't let me sign it and almost became sick just even thinking about it. So I never signed it. And here I am.
wow. That's
So
amazing. Well, and this is a great story. I mean, so many people say, well, I had this accident or I had this thing, I needed surgery, I had this whatever happened, and it stopped me and detracted me from my mission. For 20 years, it detracted me from my mission. And I kept thinking, I don't think so. I think this it's part of your mission. Like I
Well,
can't do
maybe
my
there's a
mission
bigger
because I'm not
mission.
well yet, you know?
Maybe there's a bigger mission.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something beyond that. See, this is where consciousness and thinking start to separate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they were the same, you'd get really clear about it. You'd think about, oh, well, it's bigger than this, so I'm actually not on that timeline. I need to be on this timeline. But that's not what happens. And if those two were together, then all of these successful people would say to me, oh, yeah, I knew I was going to get here. Yeah, nothing surprising, to be this successful or be in this spot. But no one does, right?
Right,
Because the
right.
consciousness and the thinking are two different things. So when you're sitting there saying that, ah, this chronic fatigue is stopping me being on my mission, right? I go, no, wrong. It's actually getting you to expand into a bigger mission, to be more on purpose, to be in a in a more amazing place that your thinking brain can't even imagine. So let go.
Mm.
Step into the consciousness, step into the fullness of your consciousness and be in flow with that. And the fullness of consciousness moves timelines, goes through the middle and creates it. It's a bit like it's a bit like a boat, right? And if you look at the wake of a boat, if you sit right behind a boat, you can see the wake comes out and it creates this line almost, right? That's thinking reality. That's being in a timeline. But you're not that. You're the boat creating the wake. Do you know what I mean? Moving
Mm.
through the water that hasn't been moved apart yet. You are that. You are that boat. So go into a different, totally different reality than what you can even imagine. And the only way to do that, and the starting point, is to go through the middle of whatever you're going through.
Wow. And that's kind of like, if people haven't watched the first show that we did about the underworld journey,
Yeah,
super
exactly.
helpful.
It sort of circles back around on that to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how you sort of get into the middle to some
Yeah.
point.
Well, and
Um, yeah,
before we end, Marcus,
yeah,
people can find out where you are. One last question, unless
of
it's too
course.
long. You had mentioned once to me about how when we're more expanded, we can see the less expanded states or realities, but we can't see above. So does that mean like if we have loved ones or friends or family who aren't doing the work, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
that they are in a state of distress or lack of peace or whatever, that we can see their reality, but they can't see our reality of where we're at?
Often the case. So when we think about timelines and dimensional realities, we've got to think in spheres, not in linear progression. And this is
Yes.
one mistake a lot of people make is they go, well, I'm at the third dimension. I want to get to the sixth dimension. Wow, this linear progression, and it's just an old egoic sort of any linear progression is an egoic state of existence because it automatically says that at this level, or if I'm at this level, you're at this level, then I'm, better almost. It almost says that. So we think about it from a spherical point of view, and the sort of right now, the sort of reality of it is when you're at one sphere, a smaller sphere, a more contracted sphere, you get to see whatever's in that sphere. As you move into the next expanded sphere, you get to see all of the spheres. So everything within the sphere you can see. Everything that's sort of outside of that is at this point a little tricky to see. It's hard to see. This is why going through the middle and having an experience of, materializing something more amazing than I ever thought is a classic example of this because you can't sort of see up through the bubble. If we imagine it's a sphere, we can't see up through the bubble. We can see down through the bubble. So whatever spheres are smaller, we can see down into them. We just can't see up out of them. So this is where you have those experiences that, there's a whole lot of sort of funny YouTube videos and, social media posts around people who are just look like they're saying silly, crazy things because they're in a totally different timeline where what they're saying is absolute truth and reality. Yet you're seeing it going, this person's a loony, don't they understand? Just and it's even sillier things now because of the compression of timelines and the compression of dimensions. We are seeing the separation of this so much more than we've ever seen in the past.
Ah, okay.
So
Well,
much
there's
more.
certainly
Yeah.
things that seemed like it's always been true in the reality that I remember, like the way churches look, the way certain buildings look, the parliament buildings in Canada, Britain, like, and then realizing, wait a second, why are the doors 40 feet high or however high they are?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't make sense. Why would they make doors that big? And why would the door not be 20 feet up? because I
kind of
can't
bizarre.
reach it.
No,
You
kind
know,
of
like,
interesting.
and I'm like, I've never seen it from that lens, but now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it.
No, that's exactly right. So once you've seen, yeah, exactly, and that's a classic. That's a classic example of, seeing down through, spheres or timelines or realities or whatever you want to call it, but not being able to see up through it. Because at one point you couldn't make that connection, and then all of a sudden you made the connection. Now you can't unmake the connection.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing.
You can't unmake the connection, which tells us that once you expand, you can't contract.
Mm,
It's
wow,
not
wow.
possible.
That's so
Yeah.
cool. Well, Marcus,
Wow.
I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Dimensional Deep Dive. I'm absolutely loving this. I know next show we're going to be talking about what does it mean to go to the next octave. So definitely, everybody, make sure you show up for that show, and we're going to continue this conversation.
Right.
Marcus, where can we find you?
Well, you can find me at Heart of the Matrix in Facebook land, so Heart of the Matrix. You can also go to centerforquantumhealing.org, and I've got an on-demand workshop that I'm going to give you a link to, Karen, that I'd love to offer to your audience. So a really beautiful training that I did, which will help with all of this sort of stuff. So I might give you that link, and we can put that down or wherever you put it on the show.
Yeah, yay!
Yay!
That's so exciting. Any last words before we go, Marcus?
Look, I think start the first part of this journey is to understand thinking versus consciousness and start to sort of like separate those things. And we need to start separating a number of concepts that we've been led into believing is one thing: time, space, intertwined, can't be separated. Thinking and consciousness can't be separated; they're the same thing. They're not. We need to start separating those and start just playing with those concepts.
Mm, okay, okay. Wow, that's great. Awesome. Thank you again. And we want to thank everyone for listening in to Light Warrior Radio. Until next time, lots of love, everyone. Thank you, Marcus. So fun. So fun.
See ya.